Hey there. Yes, you. Another long day? Mind still racing, searching for a little peace. You've come to the right place. Tonight, we'll step quietly into the past, to a time when journeys were long, roads were rough, and travelers carried little more than hope and bread in their satchels. Imagine walking along dusty paths through villages and fields, the sun sinking low, and wondering where a poor traveler might rest for the night. Was it in a tavern, a stranger's barn, or beneath the stars themselves? This is not a story of kings or great battles. Tonight, I'll tell you about the ordinary people, the peasants, pilgrims, and wanderers who found shelter in the simplest places. We'll talk of wayside inns, of monasteries that opened their doors, of roadside shrines, of fires lit beneath hedgerows, and of the kindness of strangers. So, turn off your lights. Let your phone rest gently by your side. Take a deep breath, in and out. There's no rush here. Just the quiet rhythm of footsteps on old roads, the creak of a wooden cart, the soft hum of a tavern at night, and the hush of wind through the fields. Close your eyes if you wish, or keep them open and let your mind wander back. Tonight, you'll travel through time, not as a knight or a king, but as an ordinary soul on the road, finding rest where you can, and peace where you least expect it. Relax, listen, and let the story carry you into sleep. The road stretched out like a ribbon of dust and stone, winding through fields, forests, and small villages. Travel was slow, measured by footsteps or the steady plod of hooves. Every bend in the path carried uncertainty, danger, wonder, or simple weariness. To set out on a journey was to step into the unknown. Not everyone traveled by choice. Peasants left their villages for markets, pilgrimages, or seasonal work. Merchants carried goods to towns. Monks walked to distant monasteries. Messengers bore letters sealed in wax. Each journey had a purpose, but all shared the same hardships of the road. Travelers carried what they could: a small sack of bread and cheese, a flask of ale, maybe a blanket. Shoes wore thin, cloaks gathered dust, and bodies grew weary. The road tested patience and strength in ways the village fields never did. Few walked alone. Travelers banded together for safety, peasants with pilgrims, traders with messengers. A group meant more voices around the fire, more eyes to watch the dark, and more comfort when miles seemed endless. Day after day, the rhythm of walking became a kind of music, boots thudding against the ground, carts creaking, distant bells ringing from a church tower. The road had its own heartbeat, steady and unchanging. Every night brought the same question: where would they sleep? Some nights a kind villager opened their barn. Other nights, a monastery gate offered sanctuary, and sometimes there was nothing at all but the hard ground beneath the stars. As the sun sank low, travelers felt urgency rise. Night was a time of uncertainty, thieves, wolves, and the cold wind. To find shelter before darkness was a prayer, whispered by every weary soul on the road. For peasants who rarely left their fields, the road was more than a path. It was a world apart. It brought sights, strangers, and stories they would never forget. A single journey could stretch the imagination wider than a lifetime at home. On lonely roads, when the night grew cold and the wind cut sharp, travelers searched the horizon for a warm glow. A candle flickering in a window, smoke rising from a chimney. These were signs of an inn. For the weary, it was more than shelter. It was the promise of warmth, of food, of safety in a world that could be harsh and uncertain. Inside the inn, the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and roasted meat. Merchants unrolled their packs, pilgrims laid down their staffs, and farmers warmed their hands by the fire.
It was a meeting place of strangers, each with their own tale, drawn together by the simple need for rest. For a few hours, the burdens of the road were set aside. Every inn was built around its hearth. The fire never slept, for it cooked the meals, warmed the bones, and lit the hall with a steady glow. Travelers gathered close, trading news and stories, as sparks rose toward the rafters. In the crackle of the flames, one could almost forget the darkness waiting outside. Meals at an inn were simple, yet precious. Steaming bowls of broth, coarse bread, cheese, and sometimes salted fish or roasted game. For the wealthy, there might be spiced wine or honey cakes, but for most it was the comfort of a hot meal, a reminder that survival was possible another day. Beds were not always soft. Sometimes it was a straw mattress in a crowded loft, sometimes a wooden bench by the fire. In cheaper inns, strangers slept side by side, wrapped in cloaks against the chill. But no matter how rough, it was still better than the cold ground beneath the stars. As the inn settled into quiet, the sounds of the night took on a rhythm. The creak of timbers, the whisper of the wind through shutters, the snore of a tired farmer, the shifting of hooves in the stable. Life pressed close in those walls, and in its closeness, there was a kind of peace. The innkeeper and his family were guardians of travelers. They brewed the ale, tended the stables, swept the floors, and listened to the countless stories of those who passed through. Their work was steady, often unseen, yet it made the roads livable. Without them, the journey would have been far lonelier. When storms raged outside or snow blanketed the stop-and fields, the inn became a sanctuary. Its walls were thin, its comforts plain, but it was a light against the void. For those far from home, it was enough. A reminder that even in the vastness of the medieval world, warmth and human kindness could still be found.
Not every traveler could afford the warmth of an inn. For peasants and poorer pilgrims, the road offered little comfort beyond what kindness they might find. A knock upon a villager's door at dusk was a small gamble. Sometimes it was answered with suspicion, sometimes with silence, yet often it was answered with mercy. A farmer, weary from his own labors, might lead the traveler to the barn, nodding silently toward the straw. It was not luxury, but it was a roof against the rain, and that meant survival. To sleep in a barn was to share space with cows, oxen, or sheep. The air was heavy with the musk of hay and the warmth of living bodies. The steady breath of animals, the soft rustle of straw, the creak of wooden beams, these sounds became a lullaby of their own. A child on the road might curl against a sack of grain. A pilgrim might spread a cloak near the stall of an ox, and together they rested in a place made not for humans, yet generous all the same. Sometimes hospitality meant more than a roof. A weary family might share a crust of bread, a cup of watered ale, or a ladle of thin stew from their pot. It was never much. Peasants had little enough for themselves. But sharing, no matter how small, carried honor. The guest was reminded that even in a world of hardship, there were hands willing to give and hearts willing to care. Barns were quiet places, but they also carried voices. Travelers whispered stories by candlelight, tales of saints, of miracles, of haunted woods and distant lands. Children listened wide-eyed, hearing for the first time of cities they would never see or seas they could scarcely imagine. Even as the wind howled outside, the barn became a chamber of shared dreams, where strangers, for a single night, belonged to one another's company. In the dimness, not everyone slept at once. One traveler might keep watch, ears sharp for the sound of footsteps on the road or the cry of wolves in the distance. Trust was fragile, and barns had no locks. But in those moments, courage was found in companionship. The knowledge that someone else remained awake allowed others to drift into sleep, safe in the circle of watchful eyes. Straw cradled the weary body better than cold stone or damp earth.
It clung to clothes, scratched at skin, and left its scent in hair and cloaks for days afterward. But it was soft enough to ease aching bones, and in the simple press of straw beneath one's back, there was a strange gratitude. Gratitude for the earth's bounty, for a farmer's labor, and for the mercy of shelter. Morning light filtered through the gaps in the wood, painting the barn in shafts of gold. Roosters crowed, cows stirred, and the day began with the rhythm of rural life. Travelers rose with stiff joints, brushing hay from their cloaks, thanking their hosts with bowed heads or quiet words. Sometimes they left a coin, sometimes only a prayer. But always they carried with them the memory of a night made easier by the kindness of strangers. For peasants who traveled, barns and borrowed shelters were more than temporary refuge. They were a reminder of shared struggle. No matter how poor, people understood that someday they too might be travelers, weary and seeking rest. Hospitality was not just a gift, it was a cycle, passed on from one soul to another, binding the road together with unseen threads of compassion. In barns, travelers glimpsed lives different from their own. They saw tools lined nicely against walls, seed sacks waiting for spring, a child's wooden toy forgotten in the straw. The barn was not only shelter, it was a window into the daily rhythms of others. And in that glimpse, the road seemed less lonely, less vast, less filled with shadows. Yet sometimes even barns could not be found. A locked door, a wary glance, a village too small or too poor to offer help. And then the traveler turned once more to the open fields, laying their cloak on the earth, staring at the stars as cold bit through cloth. In those nights, barns were remembered as palaces, humble yet precious, and the traveler learned that the smallest roof, the simplest kindness, could feel like heaven itself.
There were nights when no inn appeared, no farmhouse welcomed a guest, and no monastery gates opened. The traveler would press onward as the sun sank, until shadows grew long and the horizon turned dark. Then, with no other choice, they would stop upon the open earth. The road became their bed, the sky their roof. First came the search for dry ground, a patch of grass not soaked with rain, not crawling with ants. A cloak, a rough blanket, or even straw carried from a market stall would be spread thin across the soil. For many, this was the only mattress they would know. The earth was hard, uneven, and cold, yet it was steady, and it held them through the night. If wood could be found, a small fire was lit. Its glow gave warmth, kept wolves at bay, and comforted the weary heart. But fire was also a risk. Smoke could betray a traveler's presence to thieves, and sparks could set the grass alight. So many chose instead to huddle in darkness, trusting only in silence and prayer. Above, the heavens stretched in endless constellations. To peasants who rarely traveled far, the stars were a map and a mystery. They whispered of saints and dragons, of angels and spirits walking the sky. In the stillness of night, many felt small, yet strangely protected under that eternal canopy. The steppe, the fields, the forests, each carried its own music. Owls called, dogs barked from distant villages, and the wind played low notes through branches. Sometimes hooves echoed faintly, and the heart would race, fearing bandits. But more often it was only a stray horse, a curious deer, or the shifting of cattle in the dark. If travelers met by chance on the road, they sometimes camped together. Bread was broken, cheese divided, water passed from one to another. Stories of the day's journey softened the edge of fear.
In such moments, the open field became a kind of tavern, and the moon itself their lantern. To sleep outside was to surrender. There were no doors to bolt, no walls to keep out danger. Only faith remained, in God, in fortune, or in the kindness of fate. Every dawn was a gift, a sign that one had survived the long reach of night. When the first pale light touched the horizon, travelers rose stiff and cold, blankets were shaken, cloaks pulled tighter, and weary feet found the road once more. Dew clung to grass, birdsong returned, and the long walk continued. For though the night was hard, the journey never ended with the setting sun.
Not every traveler set out for trade or survival. Some walked because their hearts were stirred by faith, a vow whispered in sickness, a prayer offered in hardship, or the hope of forgiveness led countless peasants to leave their homes and step into the unknown. They became pilgrims, wanderers not for profit, but for the soul. You could often tell them apart: a simple staff in hand, a wooden cross around the neck, a badge of a holy shrine sewn onto their cloak. Some carried little more than a pouch of bread and a water skin, trusting the kindness of strangers to sustain them. They moved slowly, with tired feet, yet with a strange glow in their eyes, as if each step was a prayer. Along the road stood monasteries, small stone houses of prayer, often surrounded by fields and gardens. Here, weary pilgrims might find food, a straw bed, or even just a cup of water. The monks saw such hospitality as service to God, for to feed a pilgrim was to feed Christ himself. Many peasants wept in gratitude, for in a world of hardship, such mercy felt like a miracle. Their paths often led to sacred places, the bones of a saint, a holy relic, a church where miracles were said to happen. To reach these sites, pilgrims walked through mud, hunger, and danger. Each mile was an act of devotion, each blister on the foot a small sacrifice. And yet, when the distant bell of a holy shrine finally rang out, all the pain seemed to fall away. Few pilgrims traveled alone for long. On the road, they joined with others, men, women, even children, bound together not by kinship, but by faith. They shared crusts of bread, offered shoulders when someone stumbled, and sang hymns beneath the stars. In the company of pilgrims, the road felt lighter, as if every soul carried a piece of the burden. For the poor, inns were costly and barns uncertain, but pilgrims believed faith itself was a kind of shelter. When storms struck, they huddled beneath their cloaks and whispered prayers. When fear came, they clenched their crosses and trusted the saints to walk beside them. Faith was their blanket, their fire, their unseen roof above the open road. Villages often welcomed them, offering a loaf of bread or a place by the fire. Some believed feeding a pilgrim brought blessings upon the house. Others simply pitied their weary feet. In this way, pilgrims wove invisible threads across the land, threads of kindness, generosity, and shared belief. When the day ended, pilgrims knelt wherever they could, on dusty paths, in open fields, or beside a quiet stream. Their voices rose in soft chants, floating into the night air. Around them, the world darkened, but within them burned a steady light. It was a reminder that though the road was long, they were never truly alone.
There were stretches of road where the world felt empty, silent, endless. But then, as if suddenly, the air would change. The path grew busy, footsteps multiplied, voices echoed in many tongues.
This was no longer the lonely road. This was the meeting place of travelers, peasants, merchants, and pilgrims alike. Markets sprouted like living hearts along the journey. Stalls stood crooked, covered with cloth or thatch, their tables overflowing with bread, dried fish, salted meat, onions, garlic, and cheese. Pots clattered, coins rang, laughter mingled with arguments. For a weary traveler, such places were both relief and temptation. Food to buy, water to drink, stories to overhear. The air was thick with smells: smoke from roasting meat, sweet spice from distant lands, the sour tang of unwashed bodies, the damp of earth churned by thousands of feet. To those who came from quiet villages, it was overwhelming, yet it was also the taste of the wider world. Near markets, way stations appeared. Some were simple taverns, rough wooden benches, a fire that never quite warmed, an ale so sour it puckered the mouth. Others were larger, offering straw beds for coin, stables for horses, even rooms for merchants with heavier purses. But no matter how rough, such places were islands of rest in the storm of travel. Here, on the crowded road, strangers crossed paths. A farmer leading a cart piled with cabbages, a merchant boasting of distant ports, a pilgrim whispering prayers. Sometimes there was kindness, a shared meal, a warning of danger ahead. Other times there was trickery, thieves pretending to trade, cheats ready to slip false coins into a weary hand. Every road held choices. At the crossroads stood weathered signposts, pointing to towns, shrines, forests, and rivers. Travelers paused there, uncertain, left or right, north or south, safety or risk. It was at these places that many stories began and many others ended. A wrong turn could mean weeks of wandering. A right one could lead home. As the sun dipped low, the noise of the market softened into music. A fiddler played, children danced, and fires flickered beneath iron pots. The weary rested, bellies full, hearts lighter. Tomorrow the road would be long again, but tonight there was company, sound, and a little joy. And when at last the crowd thinned, the travelers stepped out once more into the silence of the fields. Behind them lay the market's noise, the tavern's laughter, the crossroads' uncertainty. Ahead stretched the dark, lonely road, waiting to swallow footsteps one by one into its endless rhythm.
As the sun sank behind distant hills, the road transformed. What had been bright and open now darkened, the shadows stretching long across the rutted path. Each tree and rock seemed suddenly alive, shapes twisting and flickering with the last rays of light. Travelers drew their cloaks tighter, tightened straps on packs and belts, and cast nervous glances over shoulders. The road, so welcoming in the afternoon, now whispered caution. Night did not just fall. It crept. It lingered. It watched. Small signs warned the wary traveler. A broken branch across the path, footprints too large, too deep, fading into the dusk, a rustle in the underbrush. Wolves ever patient stalked their prey from shadows, their eyes glinting like pale lanterns. And there were men, too, hands quick, eyes sharper, always testing the innocence of those who carried coins or food. On such roads, danger often came without sound, and the unwary felt it only too late. Thieves were rarely bold in daylight. They preferred the cloak of evening, when the throng had thinned and the weak-minded or weary were alone. Some were cunning, wading along narrow passes knowing that a heavy pack could slow even the strongest walker. Others were opportunistic, striking at the first mistake,
A dropped coin, a poorly fastened satchel. A traveler might think he walked alone until a shadow merged with his own, and a hand reached silently for his purse. Lessons learned were harsh, suspicion became a shield, and every stranger's smile carried a question: friend or predator? Wolves did not knock or beg. They came from the dark edges of forests and open fields, moving silently, always in numbers. Their howls carried across valleys, warning travelers and calling kin alike. Horses sensed them first, ears twitching, hooves stamping. Dogs barked futilely, voices lost in the stillness. Sometimes the wolf pack merely watched, curious and cautious. Other times hunger drove them closer. Travelers learned to move in groups, to carry fire, to leave no scent trail that might tempt the wild. A lone walker at night was never truly alone. The eyes in the darkness were patient, intelligent, and unafraid. With darkness fully settled, the road seemed endless. Moonlight filtered faintly through clouds, casting silvery streaks across ruts and puddles. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an owl, became magnified, sharpened by anxiety. Travelers slowed their pace, hearts thumping in rhythm with the unseen. The night brought stillness, yes, but it also brought waiting for a thief's strike, a wolf's curiosity, or even a misstep in the uneven path that could send a weary body tumbling into mud or ditch. When travel could no longer continue safely, travelers stopped. Camps were hasty but careful. Fires burned low to avoid drawing attention, while at the same time providing warmth, light, and protection. Packs were gathered close, stakes and ropes marked perimeters, and the keenest eyes kept watch, while others slept. Conversation was whispered, every sound measured. Even here, amidst the supposed safety of a campfire, danger lingered, for the road's threats did not sleep. Along these dangerous stretches, stories circulated. Tales of merchants robbed in moonless nights, packs lost to cunning wolves, and travelers vanishing without trace. Some spoke of men who survived by wit alone, tricking bandits with empty satchels or false trails. Others told of those who failed. Their goods taken, their journey ended prematurely. These stories served as both warnings and lessons, etched into memory like signposts of survival. For every cautious traveler, each story was a map of what to avoid, a guide to navigating shadows and suspicion alike. The road demanded more than mere strength. It required judgment, patience, and awareness. Travelers learned to read the signs of the land, the droppings of animals, the bent grass where someone had passed, the wind's direction that might carry scent of prey or predator. They measured distance to the next village, the next stream, the next shelter. Some nights it was hours before they saw a single lamp in the distance. Other nights, the faint glimmer of a way station promised warmth and safety, drawing the tired forward. Every step was a choice, a test of intuition and nerve. Not all danger came in noise or attack. Illness, exhaustion, or misjudged terrain were just as deadly. Mud hidden beneath shallow puddles could twist an ankle, unseen thorns could fester into infection, frost could creep silently into bones. Travelers learned to respect the road in all its forms, to treat every night as a teacher, every dark stretch as a reminder of the fragility of life. The shadows that danced along the path were as much a part of the journey as the sunlit hills, as necessary to remember as the bright markets and bustling way stations of earlier hours. Eventually, night relented. The first light of dawn crept over hills, spilling golden warmth onto the weary travelers. The dark road behind them, filled with threat and uncertainty, was left in memory alone. Wolves retreated to forest edges, thieves melted back into villages, or vanished with the shadows. What remained was a sense of having survived, alert, tested, and alive. Travelers adjusted packs, stretched stiff limbs, and looked forward to the next stretch, grateful for the safety of light, even as they knew darkness would return, as patient and inevitable as the road itself.
After nights spent on shadowed roads and under uncertain skies, the sight of water brought quiet relief. A river might appear as a silver thread winding through the valley, reflecting sunlight like a ribbon of glass. Its voice, the gentle rush over stones, the distant murmur through reeds, spoke of life, of pause, and of refreshment. Travelers slowed their pace instinctively. Packs were loosened, boots unstrapped, lips pressed to cold water. Even the simplest stream offered comfort unmatched by fire or bread. Crossing a stream was not always simple. Shallow waters could hide sharp stones, muddy banks could trap the unwary, and the current, deceptively gentle, could unbalance a traveler carrying a heavy pack. Bridges, when present, were gifts of human ingenuity, rough planks across a narrow gap, or carefully woven ropes spanning deeper waters. Some bridges creaked and groaned underfoot. Others were sturdy, guiding carts and wagons with steady hands. Each crossing demanded care, patience, and attention, a brief challenge that taught respect for nature's quiet power. Sometimes rivers invited more than just travelers seeking passage. Markets clustered near their banks, where water enabled trade and life. Fishermen displayed nets heavy with silver-scaled fish. Merchants laid out spices that smelled of distant lands. Bakers and brewers set tables beneath willow trees, their wares cooling in the flowing water's shade. Children played at the edge of the river, splashing while parents bartered, the clink of coins mingling with the splash of feet. Even in the hum of activity, the river lent rhythm, a heartbeat of continuity amid the chaos of travel. Not all water was forgiving. Some rivers, swollen with rain, surged beyond their banks. Stones and fallen branches became hidden traps, and currents that looked gentle could unbalance a traveler carrying a heavy pack. Travelers learned to test depth and flow, to use poles or ropes, and to never underestimate the force of the water. Wisdom, here as on the road, meant life preserved. Impatience meant risk, sometimes fatal. Water, in all its forms, demanded humility. Bridges were more than mere crossings. They were milestones, signposts of distance and civilization. A stone arch spanning a wide river marked a town or settlement nearby. A rickety plank bridge told of remote forests and long stretches of road with no human hand to intervene. Travelers memorized each bridge, noting its condition, its companions, its dangers, and sometimes rested nearby for the comfort of water, the shelter of trees, and the knowledge that solid footing lay ahead. Nightfall beside a river was different from the dark road. Travelers often camped on banks where the gentle murmur of water replaced the tension of shadows. Fish could be cooked over small fires, clothes washed, and fatigue eased by the cool touch of flowing streams. Sleep came easier, wrapped in the knowledge that even if the night held dangers, the river would not betray them. Water offered pause, a mercy earned after long stretches of risk and uncertainty. Around riverside fires, stories flourished. Tales of crossings gone awry, of drowned carts, of narrow escapes were shared with hushed tones. Songs rose too, soft melodies blending with the river's murmur. For the weary, the storytelling was part of healing, part of marking the journey, acknowledging danger and celebrating survival. Water, ever present, became both stage and witness, a silent companion to human courage and folly alike. With the first light, rivers transformed again. Mist rose from their surfaces, curling like delicate smoke, softening the land and promising new paths. Travelers packed quickly, leaving the comfort of water behind, but carrying its memory, cool hands, quiet moments, and the sense of life flowing alongside them. Ahead the road awaited, fields, forests, and distant hills stretching endlessly. Behind, the river continued, patient, constant, reminding each traveler of both danger and mercy, of the rhythm of the journey and of the world beyond themselves. Some river crossings defined the day's travel. The choice of ford or bridge could save hours or cost dearly. Travelers watched the clouds, noting rain that might swell currents, and counted companions to balance loads and aid one another. Every decision was small yet significant, a lesson in observation, teamwork, and foresight. Mistakes here were costly. But successes brought confidence, a quiet triumph amid the vastness of the road. Eventually, the travelers turned from rivers to drier land, from gentle crossings to the winding paths of fields and hills. The water, always behind them now, lingered in memory, its voice, its lessons, its calm. Travel was never merely forward motion. It was accumulation of experiences, challenges, and mercies. Rivers, bridges, and streams were part of that accumulation, shaping journeys as much as the road itself. And as the landscape opened, revealing new horizons, travelers carried with them the silent reassurance of water's enduring presence.
After days on open roads and beside rivers, travelers often found themselves approaching forests. Trees rose like silent sentinels, their branches interlacing to form canopies that filtered sunlight into gentle, dappled patterns. The air was cooler here, tinged with the scent of moss, damp earth, and fallen leaves. Paths narrowed, roots tangled beneath footsteps, and the familiar rhythm of the road changed. Forests offered shelter and shade, yes, but they also demanded vigilance. Every rustle of leaves could be small animals or something far larger. Forests were not simply obstacles. They were puzzles. Trails branched unexpectedly, hidden by undergrowth or shadow, twisting in ways that could disorient even the most experienced traveler. Signposts were rare, and landmarks subtle. A uniquely shaped tree, a moss-covered rock, the direction of a stream. Travelers learned to observe, to memorize patterns, to sense the faintest signs of passage. One wrong turn could lead to hours of wandering, and in the deeper woods, daylight could vanish before the path revealed itself again. Sounds in the forest were magnified, sharpened, and mysterious. Birds called in sudden bursts, insects droned endlessly, and unseen creatures scuttled among leaves. A snapping twig could startle, a shadow could move faster than expected, and the mind of a weary traveler often filled gaps with imagined threats. Here, caution became instinct. Eyes scanned constantly, hands rested near belts and packs, and the pace slowed. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and aware of the unseen company in the trees. Forests held dangers beyond the obvious. Snakes coiled silently beneath roots, their warning his sometimes too late to heed. Uneven ground, hidden holes, and rotting logs threatened injury. Thieves could lie in wait on overgrown paths, knowing that a traveler alone in shadowed woods might be hesitant, distracted, or vulnerable. And larger predators, wolves, lynxes, even bears moved quietly, hunting instinctively, aware of every sound and scent. To survive the forest required not just courage, but knowledge, attention, and respect for the land. Experienced travelers developed strategies. They followed animal trails when possible, trusting patterns that hinted at safer footing. They kept to higher ground to avoid hidden pools and mud traps. Fires were small, smoke discreet, and rest periods brief yet sufficient. When traveling in groups, they watched for one another, forming loose formations that balanced protection with mobility. In the forest, each decision carried weight, and the forest itself seemed to test patience, judgment, and endurance. Not all moments in the woods were tense. Glades opened unexpectedly, bathing travelers in sunlight and offering respite. Streams bubbled over stones, pools reflected the sky, and wildflowers nodded in soft breezes. Here stories were told, bread was broken, water drank, and spirits lifted. The forest, though fraught with risk, also offered moments of beauty and reflection, a reminder that danger and peace often walked side by side. Strangers appeared less frequently in the woods than on roads, yet encounters were memorable. A lone hunter might nod silently, a hermit might offer advice, and occasionally a lost traveler begged guidance. Alliances were brief, yet essential. Warnings were exchanged, the next mile is slippery with moss, or a pack of wolves has been seen near the ridge, or the bridge ahead may not hold your weight. In these brief moments, wisdom was traded more precious than coins, and every tip could mean the difference between reaching the next clearing safely or being lost until dark. Night brought particular challenges in the woods. The canopy above blocked moonlight, turning the forest into a deep, black shadow. Sounds intensified. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, and the distant howl of a wolf. Travelers gathered closely, forming circles, fire small but steady. Sleep was light, ears attuned to the slightest disturbance. Here even the softest breath of wind could be warning or threat. Yet there was also a strange comfort. The forest was timeless, unchanging, a companion that required respect and attention, rewarding caution with shelter and a rhythm all its own. When travelers finally emerged from the trees, the open air felt like a new beginning. Sunlight warmed tired shoulders, the horizon stretched wide, and the familiar sound of wind through open fields replaced the dense, layered murmur of the forest. Yet the lessons of the woods remained: vigilance, patience, and respect for the path. Travelers carried both relief and knowledge forward, understanding that danger and beauty were often intertwined, that every journey demanded attention, and that the next stage of the road awaited. Forests were more than obstacles. They were tests. They challenged the body, sharpened the mind, and deepened the traveler's understanding of the world. Every shadow, every path, every encounter left a mark, shaping not only the journey, but the traveler themselves. And as footsteps resumed on open roads, the forest remained in memory, a place of hidden danger, quiet beauty, and enduring lessons, reminding each wanderer that the journey was never just forward motion, but also observation, adaptation,
and respect for the unseen. After forests, the road began to rise. Hills stretched ahead, their slopes gentle at first, then steep and unyielding. Travelers adjusted packs, leaned into the climb, and measured their steps carefully. The air grew thinner and cooler, carrying scents of pine, damp earth, and wildflowers clinging to rocky outcrops. Each hill demanded effort, patience, and steady rhythm. Even the strongest felt the burn in shoulders and thighs, yet the summit promised views, understanding of the land, and a brief triumph over gravity itself. Between hills lay valleys, cool, shaded, and sometimes treacherous. Streams cut across the land, shallow in some places, rushing torrents in others. Travelers had to choose paths carefully, step on slippery stones or risk muddy banks. Mist often settled in valleys, reducing visibility, softening sounds, and creating the illusion of calm. Yet valleys could hide danger: sudden floods from mountain rains, unstable slopes, or patches of loose rock that gave way beneath a weary foot. Attention was constant, awareness sharpened by necessity. The weather spoke in whispers and shouts alike. A sudden cloud cover might signal approaching rain, a gust of wind the arrival of colder air. Thunder rolled over distant ridges, echoing through valleys, warning travelers to seek shelter. Sunlight, while warm, revealed the relentless glare on rocky paths, dehydrating and tiring those unprepared. Each change required adaptation. Cloaks adjusted, packs covered, firewood gathered, water rationed. Nature was neither cruel nor kind, simply relentless and impartial, shaping journeys in subtle yet profound ways. Rain turned hills to slick inclines and valleys to muddy traps. Rocks became slippery and streams swollen beyond memory. Travelers moved carefully, boots sinking in the mud, water dripping from cloaks. Fire was difficult to maintain, meals delayed, and fatigue grew faster in wet clothing. Yet even in rain there was rhythm. The tapping on leaves, the gurgle of swollen streams, the scent of wet earth. Travelers learned to move with caution, to accept temporary discomfort, and to find small joys, a clear view after storm clouds, or a fresh taste of rain on lips. High passes tested more than stamina, they tested nerve. Steep drops on one side, narrow ledges underfoot, and sudden gusts of wind demanded focus. Travelers balanced carefully,
eyes on each step, packs secured to avoid shifting weight. These heights offered perspective, sweeping vistas of distant valleys, forests, and rivers. And while danger loomed in every shadow, the reward was understanding, the road's true scale, the land's hidden patterns, and a moment of awe that reminded all why the journey mattered. As night approached, travelers sought shelter where they could. Rocky overhangs, small groves of trees, or abandoned shepherds' huts. Fires were small but crucial, offering warmth, light, and protection from both cold and wild creatures. Meals were simple: bread, cheese, salted meat, eaten quickly, leaving no trace for scavengers. Sleep came light and cautious, yet necessary, for tomorrow would bring another climb, another descent, another test of endurance. Not every valley was dangerous. Some offered gentle relief, flat meadows where travelers could stretch, tend to horses, or gather water. Flowers and herbs grew abundantly, streams murmured softly, and bird song reminded the weary that life continued beyond effort and strain. These moments of rest were treasured, for the hills would rise again, and the road demanded constant attention and energy. Travelers learned to balance effort and repose, understanding that survival relied as much on patience as on strength. Storms in the hills could appear without warning. Dark clouds rolled over peaks, lightning split the sky, and thunder echoed through valleys with terrifying intensity. Rain or snow fell quickly, turning paths treacherous, obscuring landmarks, and chilling even the hardiest traveler. Yet experience guided preparation. Cloaks tightened, packs secured, fires tended. Travelers learned to respect the suddenness of mountain weather, to adapt quickly, and to move carefully, step by cautious step, until the storm passed or a safer path emerged. After trials of climb and descent, reaching a summit brought quiet triumph. Valleys spread below like painted landscapes, rivers twisted in silver ribbons, forests stretched endlessly beyond sight. Here travelers paused, breathing deep, feeling the world expand beneath them. Danger had been present in every step, yet accomplishment outweighed fear. The summit reminded all that effort and attention yielded reward, perspective, relief, and renewed determination to continue the journey. Descending from the high points, travelers moved carefully, mindful of fatigue and slick paths. Hills and valleys continued in rhythm, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, always shaping the journey in their own deliberate way. Each rise, each dip, each gust of wind, each sudden storm taught lessons in patience, observation, and endurance. The road was not just distance traveled, it was learning to read the land, to respect nature, and to move forward with awareness. And as the sun dipped behind distant hills, travelers knew that the journey continued, ever challenging, ever beautiful, ever demanding care and attention.
After long stretches of hills, valleys, and forests, travelers spotted smoke curling into the sky, the first sign of a village. Houses clustered together, their thatched roofs and wooden walls forming a patchwork of life against the landscape. Chickens clucked, dogs barked, and children ran along dirt paths, their laughter carrying easily through the cool air. The sight of human settlement brought relief, a promise of food, rest, and warmth. Travelers quickened their pace instinctively, hearts lifting at the thought of hearth and company. Village streets were narrow and uneven, lined with simple homes and workshops. A blacksmith's hammer rang on metal, a baker's oven released the sweet scent of bread, and a well creaked with travelers drawing water. Strangers were noticed immediately, eyes curious, some welcoming, others cautious. Merchants called out wares, children followed quietly, and farmers paused to nod. The traveler learned quickly to navigate both the path and the people, offering greetings, accepting smiles, and seeking signs of hospitality without arrogance or haste. Inns stood as the heart of rest for many. Wooden signs swayed above doors, painted with simple symbols: a mug, a bed, a horse. Inside, rough benches surrounded a central hearth, firelight dancing on smoke-darkened walls. The smell of stew and fresh bread welcomed tired bodies. Rooms were simple: straw beds for those who could pay, mats for the poor, wooden floors for those passing through quickly. Horses and carts crowded stables, and the occasional clink of coin marked transactions both small and substantial. For a traveler, inns were temporary havens, islands of comfort amid the relentless road. Food was a vital reprieve. Stews simmered over open flames, bread was warm and fragrant, and ale or water quenched the thirst brought by long days of walking. Travelers ate slowly, savoring each bite, and often shared tables with strangers. Stories flowed naturally: news of distant towns, advice about upcoming roads, or tales of past dangers, or simple recounting of the day's journey. Meals were more than sustenance. They were connection, a reminder that despite isolation on the road, people were part of a larger living world. Hospitality came with subtle rules. Innkeepers were generous but practical, offering beds or food for coins, barter, or labor. Fellow travelers could be kind, sharing warmth or advice, yet caution remained necessary. Theft and trickery lurked even here, subtle and patient. Travelers learned to balance trust with awareness, to accept help graciously, yet mind their belongings, and to recognize that the kindness of strangers was both gift and responsibility. The world beyond the road required both open hands and wary eyes.
Night brought calm. Fires and chimneys glowed faintly, windows darkened, and the village settled into a quiet rhythm. Travelers rested in rooms or on benches, breathing the gentle warmth, soothed by murmured conversations or the soft scrape of a broom. The road, dangerous and unpredictable, was left behind for a while. Sleep was deeper here, protected by walls, company, and the faint, comforting sounds of life continuing around them. Morning routines began gently. Wells were drawn, animals fed, bread fetched from ovens. Travelers helped where they could, carrying water, tending horses, or mending packs. These small acts of labor were part of the rhythm, part of belonging temporarily to a community whose hospitality made the road bearable. Even simple tasks held lessons: cooperation, patience, and the understanding that every village, however small, had its own pulse, rules, and order. When travel resumed, travelers left the village carrying both physical provisions and memories. The smell of baked bread, the warmth of a shared fire, the laughter of children, all lingered as subtle comfort. Roads ahead might again bring darkness, forests, or hills, yet the memory of human kindness offered reassurance. The journey was arduous, but it was also punctuated by these islands of life, reminding wanderers that while the world could be harsh, it was also capable of care, community, and gentle mercy. Villages taught travelers patience, observation, and humility. They revealed how people interacted, shared resources, and cared for one another. Travelers learned to read expressions, judge intentions, and navigate social spaces as carefully as physical ones. Every conversation, transaction, and gesture shaped understanding, reinforcing that survival on the road was as much about human awareness as physical endurance. Leaving the village, travelers stepped back into open roads, carrying gratitude and vigilance together. Horses were mounted, packs secured, and steps measured. Hills, rivers, forests, and distant paths awaited, but the brief haven of human hospitality lingered, a soft echo in the heart. The journey continued, unpredictable yet purposeful, shaped by both the challenges of the land and the kindness of those who lived upon it.
By the time the traveler reached the final stretch of the journey, the road had become more than stone, dust, and earth. It had become memory. Each hill climbed, each river crossed, Each shadow survived had carved lessons into the heart. Behind lay valleys of hardship, nights of fear and days of laughter. Behind lay markets buzzing with life, inns filled with warmth, forests alive with whispers, and endless miles of silence. The road was no longer just traveled, it had become lived. And ahead, something waited, the faint outline of a bridge, a crossing, not only of water, but of worlds. Bridges appeared in many forms on the road. Some were little more than planks thrown across muddy streams, others rope and timber swaying with every step. But here stood something greater, a stone bridge, vast and weathered, arching across a river so wide its far banks seemed distant as another country. The bridge was old, older than memory, built by hands long gone, yet it endured. Each stone placed with patience, each arch designed to withstand storms and floods alike. To cross such a bridge was to honor not only the labor of builders, but the countless lives who had walked before. The traveler paused, as so many had before. Bridges were never only crossings. They were thresholds. Bridges connected more than land. They connected stories. They joined villages to markets, farmers to merchants, pilgrims to shrines. They allowed culture, language, and ideas to move as freely as goods and coins. On bridges, strangers met halfway, often exchanging words, smiles, or warnings. A bridge was both physical and symbolic, a place where paths converged, where differences blurred, where the simple act of crossing turned isolation into connection. To cross a bridge was to say, I will not remain only in my world, I will step into yours. The traveler was never alone on such crossings. Merchants drove carts piled with grain, their wheels rattling loudly against stone. Pilgrims carried staffs and whispered prayers with each step. Children ran ahead of parents, their laughter mingling with the groan of carts and the clip-clop of hooves. Soldiers passed, eyes scanning, hands resting on hilts, reminding all that bridges were also places of control, guarded and watched. For whoever held the crossing held power. And yet, even with tension, there was always something human here. A glance exchanged, a hand offered when a wheel stuck, a warning shouted when a horse grew restless. On a bridge, travelers became aware of one another in ways the open road never demanded. Not all bridges were safe. Some swayed above gorges, creaking with every gust of wind. Some lay in ruin, stones missing, timbers rotting, demanding faith with every step. To cross was to accept risk, to trust the craft of others, to trust the strength of materials, to trust the road itself. And yet the alternative was longer, harder, sometimes impossible. Bridges, even in their danger, were necessities.
But bridges were not only stone and timber. Sometimes the bridge was human. A farmer offering a ride in his cart, a stranger sharing food by fire, a guide pointing to safer paths through unknown woods. People became bridges, carrying others across fear, across distance, across uncertainty. The traveler thought of those met along the way, the kind innkeeper, the cautious merchant, the weary pilgrim, the bold storyteller by firelight. Each had been a crossing of sorts, offering wisdom, kindness, or even warning. Human connection was the truest bridge of all, invisible, yet stronger than mortar or rope. From the bridge, the traveler gazed down at the river, wide, powerful, eternal. Its waters carried not only branches and stones, but the memory of lands upstream, forests, rains, and mountains far beyond sight. It flowed onward, promising to reach other towns, other villages, other roads. Water, like the road, connected everything, and the bridge was the moment of choice, to stand still or to continue,
to pause in reflection, or to move forward into the unknown. The river murmured, timeless, as if reminding every traveler, you are not the first nor the last. You are but one step in a chain without end. As the traveler lingered on the crossing, the sun lowered, painting the water in gold and crimson. Shadows lengthened, and the clatter of the day softened. Merchants slowed, children grew drowsy, and voices hushed as if the bridge itself demanded silence at dusk. There was a strange peace here, a stillness that balanced perfectly between journey and rest, between what had been and what was yet to come. The traveler leaned on the stone wall, feeling the cool surface, and breathed deeply. This, too, was part of the journey, not only movement, but pause, not only effort, but reflection. Step by step, the traveler moved forward, each footfall echoing against stone, each echo fading into the vastness of sky and river. At the far end of the bridge lay fields, distant hills, and the promise of more roads. The journey itself was unending, for every road led to another, every crossing to a further horizon. But within the traveler's heart, something shifted. The road was no longer unknown. It was companion. Danger no longer terrified. It instructed. Villages were no longer strangers. They were resting places of shared humanity. The bridge, in its quiet majesty, became the perfect ending, for it held all that the journey had been: challenge, risk, connection, survival, and hope. When the last stone of the bridge was left behind, the traveler paused and turned. The river gleamed, the bridge stretched back like a ribbon between worlds, and the memory of all that had been walked flooded gently into mind. Ahead, the road stretched once more into silence, into possibility. But something was different now. The traveler no longer feared the road's emptiness, nor its dangers, nor its loneliness. For every path carried life, in wolves, in thieves, in storms, in laughter, in bread shared, in fires lit. The road was not only hardship, but meaning. And bridges of stone, of rope, of kindness, of memory would always appear, carrying travelers across whatever chasm lay before them. And so with quiet resolve, the traveler stepped forward once more, into the rhythm of footsteps and silence. The road continued, as it always had, as it always will. But within, there was peace. The journey, in truth, was never about reaching an end. It was about learning to walk, to endure, to notice, and to connect. And in that, every traveler found home.
Thank you for walking this path with dream-woven history, where stories never fade and memories live forever. May your night be peaceful, your dreams full of wonder, and may history whisper to you until the morning light.